So I'm very, very happy today Andruid is today. I think we met each other when we were both graduate students in whatever like student consortium type of thing. And I was very impressed by all the cool stuff that Andrew has been doing. I don't want to tell you how many decades ago that's it. But all right, I'm not going to steal his thunder. I will let him talk to you and tell us what you're doing for the creativity. Oh, and Andrew and I both serve on the Creativity and Cognition Conference steering committee, and that's also a cool conference people should go to. Okay, go, Andrew, take it.
Thanks so much, Ellen and Mark and Jill and Joel. I'm excited to be here. So I'm going to talk today about this idea of how to investigate creativity and participation. This talk is a kind of reflection on projects that I've worked on over a long period of time at the Interface Ecology Lab and at Texas A&M, collaboration with advisees and other researchers, faculty. And in the light of this recent going on 3 years that I've spent at the National Science Foundation as a program director. So what do I mean by creativity and cognition and participation? So these what I call ineffable essences of what it means to be human. So creativity involves people making things, and it's invaluably important both for personal satisfaction and economic innovation. And when I talk about creativity, I mean in all aspects of life by all kinds of people. And participation, I mean when people get to play an active role. You can see here this notion of sharing and holding in common, but and it's again important to personal satisfaction and here to direct democracy. So my time at NSF has really provoked me, stimulated me to think about data methodologies and to focus on them as a crucial aspect of doing research, and in particular in these areas of research. And NSF's vision is to capitalize, and I find I always end up talking about data and its role in research. For example, when I mentor principal investigators in particular, but not just limited to creative design and otherwise creative, oriented researchers. So yeah, this note to NSF's role in new concepts in research and education. Where can new technologies come from? I mean, all the sciences and engineering play a role in those. And NSF is the science foundation. So there's this expectation there from a policy standpoint. But as I'm going to talk about, science isn't really, it's necessary, but it's not sufficient. But this part about science that it involves gathering evidence to the basis of contributions. And scientists have this habit of thinking in terms of quantitative data and controlled studies, but that doesn't always make sense with regard to new technologies, as many of you are aware. So some of the data methodologies that are important include qualitative data, including grounded theory textual data, which is fairly well often, again, thought about, but also visual data plays a really important role in research I do. And I think in a lot of research about new technologies, and some of the forms of quantitative data I'm going to talk about include ideation, metrics, and engagement analytics. And also the importance of the settings of studies. You can do lab studies and they're important. and you can get more control. But when you do field studies, you could potentially have people engaging in activities that are more important, more significant to them. And this can really matter in terms of the kinds of things they do. So as a way of talking about these different data methodologies, I'm going to jump into a case study here with Twitch streaming live social media. And the research questions in this study, which involved 4 years of participant observation by my advisee, Bill Hamilton, who's now an assistant professor at New Mexico State University. Included how and why do streaming communities form? And what is the streaming community? I'm going to show this in a minute. In a minute, what fosters participation? This is especially a study in this context of this talk about an investigation about participation, and what are the roles of different kinds of media. And we use McLuhan's model, in which he thinks about hot media like video or gameplay as media that take your attention, overload you in a sensory way, versus cooler media like text chat that leave you more room to reflect. And I just want to also mention that Twitch right now has around 3 million viewers, 24 hours on average, 24 hours a day, 1.2 million streamers, and there's 70 million hours per day watched. So that's the scale of this platform, Twitch. Okay, so now let's look at what is a Twitch stream.
Video game live streaming on sites like Twitch TV has become a popular form of social media over the past several years.
You can see
we take an ethnographic look at live streaming communities and practice. We find that by combining video and text chat, live streaming uniquely supports the formation of participatory communities.
So sorry, you can see the gameplay in here and the video of the streamers.
Video enables viewers to observe rich ephemeral experiences, while chat enables broad participation and sharing of reactions. There are many emerging issues, and what participation looks like is constantly
changing. So the video, the visual data is already telling a story here about what Twitch is and how it works. And our findings begin with that, well, the roles of these different media, the video and the chat, and the roles of the different people in streaming communities, the streamers, the people who do the gameplay, the followers, the audience, and these intermediate people, moderators who provide a kind of social glue. And we found that streams can ideally, and in many cases, function as communities of practice, using Levin-Wenger's social theory about education, where people learn from each other. And as third places like coffee houses where people spontaneously get together. Further, visual data includes these images of streamers engaged, of art that viewers contribute. And here's some textual qualitative data about what viewers are looking for. There are a lot of people in here that are self-conscious or have other certain problems, and just saying hello and being nice to them, interacting with them can really make their day. And so our finding from this is that supporting meaningful engagement is important, and that smaller groups can be really valuable in this, so people can know who each other are and create this kind of social cohesion. But unfortunately, in Twitch, there's this drive to have really enormous streams, because that's where monetization comes from. And we have a streamer here saying, if I could only have 150 people, which seems like rather a lot to me in my stream, I would love that, but it's impossible because I wouldn't make any money. So our implication for policy here is that there's a need for social media that are not just for profit, but are have more of a societal basis. And I mean, a long discussion could be about where these could come from and how they could be supported. And finally, that chat becomes unreadable when you get past 150 viewers. And our implication here is for a need to generate social subdivisions of larger streams when you have larger streams. And in as much as you understand who the streamers are, who the viewers are, you could both align and you could find things in common and points of diversity and putting those groups together. Okay, so that work is about participation. I'm going to show some work that's more specifically about creativity and specifically about spatial forms of information organization, which we've called information composition and freeform web curation. There are 5 different systems that were that the Interface Ecology Lab has developed, have been used by over 9,000, nearly 10,000 students, and 75 offerings of 25 courses given by 21 professors in 13 departments and 6 universities. So we've gotten this stuff out there a fair amount, and I think that's affected what we can learn as well as what we've been able to learn, as well as the broad impacts of this work, the impacts on society, as NSF would call them. So this patterns of freeform web curation study, which was led by Nick Lupfer, who is now working at a GIS startup. Here our research question was, how do students represent visual, semantic, and semantic collections of information resources when performing these special collections? When performing information-based ideation tasks, that is tasks when the goal is to have ideas. I want to go back over here by what I mean by visual and semantic, this notion of the rich clipping that we developed starting in our combined formation work earlier, the idea of an element that's come from a web page that has context from that web page. So it's an image of a fan. Here, the metadata, the context includes not just the title, although that's important, but also the price and the ratings and the reviews. And this is an alternative representation to reference collections that are linear and textual, or bookmark collections. And here in the idea Miche prototype, which preceded the live Miche prototype that I'm using in this presentation, was a single user environment with a zoomable interface. And in this study, we put together a corpus of nearly 4,500 curations that were created by nearly 1,600 students and 10 offerings of 6 courses. And we did a visual grounded theory analysis where we took the visual data and we actually counted different elements. And when we identified these different patterns. Oh, and I'm reminded here, this is a really important thing about data, that one of the things that becomes important about data is its role to people, that we worked on early, in the midst of this, is that we realized that IRBs were kind of pressuring us to have all the data be confidential, but which is really important. People's privacy is important, but also when people are doing creative work, that they deserve credit for it. And so we worked out this this option for attribution. So, okay, I'm going to talk about a few things at once here. So we identified, first of all, in developing this pattern language of freeform web curation, we identified 4 major patterns: morphology, overlap, group, and path, and then sub characteristics within them. So morphology being the arrangement of elements in a recognizable form. And then on the right-hand side here, we see an example of a concrete morphology in which the shape is that of a Twitter feed, and this was mimicked by Christine Lee, an undergraduate student in a communications course, an upper level communications course, developing a paper about feminist activism on Twitter, and she mimicked what a Twitter feed looks like in organizing data, and you can see on the right here concepts about her final paper. And here on the left, you can see Andrew Webb in a graduate course of mine organizing. Here we have an abstract morphology, a plot, organizing elements from Bertin's semiology of graphics along these two axes of conceptual and from general to more specific. The overlap pattern involves putting elements on top of each other with these subtypes of compose, using overlap, composite using transparency, translucence, and map, relating elements to a physical space or geographic area. And some examples we see of map from a graduate landscape architecture course. And here we see an analysis of coastal designs and their relationship to climate change and how effective they were. This one is anonymous. This student didn't give us permission to use their name, which is totally fine. But so you can see how sketching is used here to develop this kind of visual analysis, and we'll see this in some other work later on in the talk. And here, this combination of sketching and curation, of putting elements together by Christine Vaughn, where she sketched this new building. She did this tiling of different skies here, but then the textures on the building itself are made of old buildings. So she has this conceptual take on, she's using this medium to relate old buildings and new buildings in an interesting, creative way. Okay. The other two major patterns that we found of grouping and paths, I don't have time to go into them in detail now, but I think that these examples are both worth Jordan Jump's product innovation, washing machine notification washer, and Catherine Kimmel's scoliosis, which has these general ideas about what scoliosis is, and then there's graph, and then all the way getting down to her own experience of that they're interesting uses as a medium. Oh, right, I want to talk very briefly about this strategies study. I don't have time to go into detail about it, but one thing we did, we conceptualized these strategies of free-form web curation, collect, assemble, shift perspective, sketch, write, and exhibit. And we made tools corresponding to each of them in idea mache. And I think the most important thing here, and then we counted, we used logs of how people use the tools, and we found very high uses of all the spatial organization and shifting perspective stuff, drag and drop, positioning, scaling, and zoom, and then also significant amounts of sketching, writing, and what we called faceting. Use of things like rotation and transparency. Okay. Let's see. So next, I want to talk about, algorithm in the loop composition. So this was done earlier work with our combined formation prototype, which integrated searching and along with collecting and refinding. And the thing that's different about combined formation is this algorithm in the loop, the idea that that agents would help in this process over time. And let's see here. Okay, perfect. So here is some video where you can see that. So a combined formation session started with the user specifying seeds, that is queries to search engines in this case, for how the agents would perform searches and then gather elements. And then here we have, again, using McLuhan's model and the hot space in the exterior, the elements being identified by the agents and brought into the external space, the hot space, and then the user has complete control of the cool space in the center, and is so collecting and visually organizing elements in this space. You can see again the metadata here, which again here includes the queries that the seeds came from. I want to talk for a moment here about if we look at how combined formation worked, this seeding and then there's a user model using term frequency versus inverse document frequency. That's used to rank the clippings and also the crawling of links. And then Andrew Webb generated, who's now an assistant professor at Louisiana State University, developed this messy organizer algorithm using simulated annealing to put related elements near each other, but not on top of each other, which is an interesting little problem. Here you can see the user choosing elements. So I'm going back to the source context of the web page from the collection using the, here we see the tag cloud representation of the interest model, and you saw interest being expressed in a specific term there to change what the agents would do to influence that. The hot space can be cleared so the user can see new elements better. Continuing to assemble elements in the cool space. And here the user decides to change the seeds to get rid of the old seeds and make a new one about kitchens. So then to this materials, this sustainability materials, this sustainable home project, they add these materials about kitchens. And then here you can see at the end, they're doing a final organization and a larger version of the cool space to put together this idea that they call eco-sumptuous design. So that's an emergent idea that that came from the process. The user didn't start with that idea. So we did a study, a controlled laboratory study with 44 participants. In this case, we had a provocative stimuli hypothesis using this creative cognition notion of fixation, respecting that is that when people work on creative tasks, they tend to get stuck in looking at them in a certain way, and that provocative stimuli are like incubation. Those are means to change someone's perspective. In this case, so our hypothesis, so when we formed the condition using combined formation, using the algorithm in the loop information composition, having the user spend 10 minutes working on their own first, and then using the algorithm in the loop composition to stimulate their creativity, so that they would do that initial work by themselves first. And then in the controlled condition, they didn't have the stimulus. we had 2 information-based ideation tasks to make a 2x2 within subject design, one about stem cell research and the other about liberty and security. And we had these ideation metrics. We have these ideation metrics, fluency, the number of elements, flexibility or variety, the diversity of the elements, which can is expected to lead to more flexible thinking, looking at things from different perspectives, and novelty, the rareness of the elements. And what we can see in the results here is that in the provocative stimuli condition, users collected more image elements, significantly more, not significantly more text, but not significantly. Significantly from more different documents, from more different websites and more different kinds of websites like blogs or academic journals or popular news sources, for example. And more novel images, which you can measure in a controlled study like this, source documents and websites. We also found we had developed over an extended period of time an emergence metric for measuring the distinctness of, for measuring the concepts that people develop through groupings of elements. And emergence was also significantly greater in the provocative stimuli condition. The other holistic metrics, that is looking at the elements put together as a whole, relevance, how the relatedness of the elements to the information-based ideation task and writing exposition were not significantly different. But visual presentation was worse in the provocative stimuli, in the algorithm and the loop composition condition, because there are more elements. So, okay, so what did we find? So we found that the algorithm and the loop information composition did stimulate creativity, and that this combining of image and text visual semantic representations is effective for creative cognition. We found that information-based ideation tasks, like the sample ones here, that is tasks where people's goal is to have ideas and information is providing a support, that these tasks work as a structure for doing performing studies as a way of getting data, and that the ideation metrics can provide significant results. This provocative stimuli structure, I think, is really important. There are other findings about group brainstorming, for example, that show that it's better to have people work by themselves before they work in groups if you want to generate creative ideas. And the side effect, the more elements you have, the harder visual presentation is, which did lead us, in fact, to, I'm sorry, I'm trying to have a clock here, to develop the zoomable interface that you see in this environment. Okay, next I want to talk about the Andrew Webb's interstices work. So we also built a version of Idea Mache that Andrew was the lead on, called Embodied Idea Mache, or Emma. I'm going to play a video showing Emma in action here. And here you see, come on, full screen. Okay, so here you see the screen on the left and 2 views of the user's hands. It's the graduate student working on a landscape architecture project and doing this this kind of visual annotation and analysis, again, to show what design elements, how they're functioning, and to develop design ideas. Yeah, and again, we see the role of visual data as giving us a sense of what it means to have this embodied pen and touch interaction for, come on, for doing this kind of work with information, with large numbers of elements. One of the things that was taken into account in this design and is really central in it is this notion of the art's kinematic chain and the roles of the dominant and non-dominant hands and how they're asymmetric. The dominant hand is going to do more manipulation, and the non-dominant hand, typically people's left hand, is going to do simpler things, and so one of the things that we used in the interaction design was edge constrained, that is interactions with the non-dominant hand. That is, I'm pointing, but you can't see on camera. That is like things at the edge, at the side of the display. Here you can see some more visual data. Some of it is the same, some of it from different contexts and how people use the environment. In the course of doing this work, we noticed we observed four kinds of what we call interstices, excuse me. That is what people do with their hands between interactions, and we realized that this is significant. So hover, away, rested, and stabilizing. So here you can see the hover, that is someone keeping their hand, their non-dominant hand nearby while manipulating elements in anticipation of something that they're going to do next. So that's the most engaged. The next one, away, the non-dominant hand is less in context, but still somewhat active and somewhat ready to return to the environment. You know, and I can also mention in terms of data, of course, putting together these environments where you can do this kind of live video capture of multiple perspectives at one time, I think is a good, can be a valuable tool for getting understanding of how people use video environments. Embodied interaction environments. And here, the rested interstice, which again, sometimes so the hand was there all the way down, but sometimes still, you could see that one place where it comes back into play. Okay, and then the stabilizing interstice, which I didn't show, didn't emerge until, so we had two studies until the second, two study contexts. The first one, just 3 students, graduate students, but they spent 3 to 5 hours each, and they were more advanced students, so their use was more sophisticated, really. And so we did this engagement analytics analysis, this protocol analysis of this video of how of engagement in the 3 interstices in the first study, and you can see that we got quite substantial numbers of each interstice for all 3 participants. And then these were for these long sessions. Then for the second context, there were 14 students, undergrads, less experienced, shorter amounts of time, and we did the same kind of analysis. And again, we found in almost all the cases, all 3 interstices, although I guess occasionally you don't see away, you just see hovering and rested. And that's where the stabilizing interstice emerged from this second context. So what did we learn? What do we learn? I guess I should admit this person. There's this sustained relationships between people's hands and when performing this kind of embodied interaction and displays and the means of interaction, and that they express user anticipation of what they're going to do in the future. And people aren't thinking about this, they're just doing it. And this notion of embodied cognition in the hands conveying intention, for one thing, it's connected to language and action areas in the brain, which is definitely worthy of further study. and this sustained embodied relationships between hands and interaction modalities, I think, is really an important avenue for future research with a wide variety of devices, including and interaction modalities, including this kind, but also AR, VR, tangible 3D objects that this kind of study, and actually I'm really interested in adding fMRI, could be really interesting for understanding how to use, how to give people better interaction using embodied modalities. Okay, there's one more context. How much time do I have, Ellen?
Sure, 20 minutes.
How much?
20.
Wow,
Okay.
that's more than I expected. That's shocking. Okay. I'm going to talk about the collaborative media, live media curation project, which this is work by Bill Hamilton and Nick Lupfer primarily. A bunch of undergraduates and other grad students also did work on it. And this involved this system here, the live Vichet system, and an earlier version that had support for live video. And there is text chat here. So the influence of Twitch on this work. And this was a small scale study in 4 courses. You can see here, human-centered computing, which was a seminar I offered about how it was being used for presentation of here user interface prototypes and mobile application experiences, which was taught by someone at a different university. And then we had landscape architecture again, and I'm gonna have this long-term set of collaborations with landscape architects, Galen Newman among them, and Jeremy also, who's the professor here. So here we see again sketching being used to explain, to annotate and explain structures.
So all these trees are screening the building, so you don't have that neoclassical influence on your aesthetic experience anymore. Now you're in a different type of park. Now you're actually in part of the.
So sorry, so there's a video stream that's at the bottom right here. It's docked here. It could be in this space, and yeah, and he's this is a remote course being taught. Using this environment, and where they're sketching over
sculpture garden, because look at that. That's a very
is playing this explanatory role.
So what Gaudi would do is he would take a string and he would hang these weights on it, and this whole thing is hanging up. It's hanging down.
So there you can see on the bottom right the Sagrada Familia in Barcelona, and you can hear him explaining the design of it.
Gravity is pulling.
And then he's going to use this gesture of rotation here to explain,
weights,
to teach.
Weights down, right? And so what he did actually though was he designed a building. So now you can see these strings.
So yeah, that's the Sagrada structure there.
Of showing how the forces of.
And then here in this example, you can see curation by a student on the fly spontaneously contributing to the discussion. This Game of Thrones image that she brings in.
Oh, interesting.
So not super high quality images, but that's kind of the vibe I got.
Interesting. No, that's cool. Because again, like you say, it has that sense of being constructed, but at the same time, it also looks, it doesn't have any symmetry in it. And I also like the repetitiveness of that one element. Here, I'm going to draw on it.
So yeah, so you can see the visual annotation again, but also the spontaneous curation is a way of the student could contribute to the discussion and the explanation on the fly. Okay, so that 20 minutes actually included the, I just realized included the time for discussion. So I am kind of on time here. So what have we learned? What's the perspective that we get about how to investigate creativity and participation? I keep saying cognition because Ellen mentioned this conference that we're involved in, but creativity and participation, which, yeah, that last example has both creativity and participation in it, the collaborative live media curation and this role of sketching over and curation in video. So this epistemology, I like to say, of data methodology, visual data shows us what people make and how they make it. It gives us invaluable information about how new technologies get used, and it lets us see people's experiences. Textual qualitative data gives us understandings of how people perceive their experiences and how they reflect on those experiences, and this can contribute to generating ideas for new technologies and how to use them. Which again, the sciences don't really have methods for this directly. They're more design-oriented approaches. Quantitative data is really valuable for measuring human processes and showing us differences between conditions when it makes sense to compare conditions, which is not always, but sometimes. And then we showed with algorithm in the loop information composition the effects on ideation by using these ideation metrics, measuring components of creativity and these different creative products that people, or similar creative products that people made. When we used engagement analytics with the web curation strategies and interstices to show how the tools were used or how the actions were taken, and with the interstices to show that that was similar in different contexts. Underlying this research is a valuing of human experiences, not just the things that people make, but how people make them. And I think that in terms of supporting investigations of creativity and participation, this is crucially important. The natural sciences give us way for proving things about phenomena that exist, but design gives us at the same time ways of generating ideas and incorporating data about what people do. That is showing what is possible versus proving what is right. And if you look at Chi citation counts, for example, for recent years, it's mostly papers from the design episteme that are having more of an impact, and that's important. And this is something, not surprisingly, that I've argued at NSF as part of my time there. And I'm always bringing up. Research contributions are stories, and we always need to think about how we're telling our stories and what kinds of data we're going to use, and having an integrated sense of this. And also this real importance, the value of contextualized studies, of doing the difference. I mean, I did a lot of work on the algorithm in the loop composition studies, and I'm proud of them, and I think they matter. But the more spontaneous studies where people are doing things that matter to them, I certainly don't think they're less important or less significant. They're different. And so this kind of investigations of ineffable aspects of human experiences, like creativity and participation. We need to bricolage, we need to put together different methodologies as we can to tell different kinds of stories. Specifically, and from this research shows the effect of information and representations of information and interaction on creativity, reflection, and participation. The roles of spatial organization and sketching, image and text representations of references and promoting ideation and collaboration. I want to mention briefly in the next cycle and determined to take on this larger context, which has always been crucial in my work, but to address more directly issues of empowering humanity through computing. And one new area I intend to go into is, which you can see the starts of that in the work on attribution with people's data, but it's about empowering people with regard to their data rather than it being a tool for using people and surveilling people. I think that's a really important problem. And I think there's a lot of work to be done about giving people access to and like helping people understand the data that's being collected about them. I intend to continue to work on embodied interactive experiences with a variety of modalities, to work on processes of creativity and design, diversity and inclusion in contexts including education, government, and industry. And that's, you know, and I'm also intend to work on playing a role in collaborative grants and larger scale projects. And here are some of the NSF programs that I'm aware of where this might, some of which I'm currently a program director in, where this could matter. And but yeah, I can play different roles in collaborations. I can initiate them, I can support them, I can mentor them. But this goal of empowering humanity, I'm quite committed to it, and I understand that that's a microcosmic thing, not just a macrocosmic thing. And I'm really excited about Atlas as a potential place to where I can work on these things because of the people and the mix of fields. I think the mixing fields is incredibly important, and it's really the potential to be somewhere where that's like normal and expected is really important to me. So here are some ideas about how to investigate creativity and participation, work that I've been doing and how I'm thinking about it retrospectively and with an eye to the future. Thank you so much for having me here today. It's a pleasure. And I certainly would be grateful for thoughts and questions and ideas, any kind of conversation and dialogue.
What? Is there a question? The owl is here, so you can speak up. We can hear you.
All right, I'll start to break the ice. Andruid, I've followed your work for a long time. Somehow the algorithm in the loop work escaped me, and you mentioned that the algorithm in the loop produced, I'm paraphrasing, increased creativity. But I wondered whether any stimulus increased creativity, or was there something about this particular algorithm that is maybe a random algorithm would do just as much to increase creativity as whatever specific algorithm? So could you speak on that?
Well, I mean, one thing that's not in that presentation is all the studies that ended up on the cutting room floor, if you will. So no, I think that getting significant increases in creativity and by these metrics and other is actually quite challenging and doesn't happen by itself. I mean, it certainly would be possible to study anything with resources, and I'm not saying it could be a good idea to do other studies as validation. Mark, I wouldn't be against that, but I can just say that in my personal experience, getting statistically significant results on metrics across conditions is really hard. And all the studies that were done where there weren't, yeah, I guess there's a second study in the paper where there are not as many different differences. Actually, that's about having the cool space in a separate window versus having it integrated in the middle. And there are fewer, even in that case, there are fewer significant differences. So, yeah. Science should be so easy as you just suggested, Mark. That would be awesome.
No, I just mean if you randomly kick the person in the middle of their interaction, is that significantly less useful than whatever algorithm? I think you got it though.
Yeah, I think the chances are, I mean, you could try doing that study. I think the chances are very low that that would actually have that kind of effect. That's my personal experience. You know, as in addition to questions or comments about my own work, you know, I would love to hear about how people are using data in your studies, if that could be relevant too, because I doubt that I'm the only one here who studies ineffable essences of what it means to be human, and these issues of research, construction, epistemology they're interesting and challenging.
Laura has a question. Sure.
Yeah, I just thank you so much for the talk. And I have to say, it's quite a risk to do your own slide software. So nicely done. I'm just curious about like how your teaching has been influenced by your research and vice versa.
Sure, I can say a lot about that. And I'll say about in terms of using the software that I mean, that's kind of related. I just find having this medium, like representing talks in this medium, causes me to think in a different way than PowerPoint and linear media do. And yeah, so I'm kind of addicted to it. I worry about it, but it's not something easily for me to let go of, because the spatial organization to me really helps me think. And I've certainly, well, like in the programming studio course, half capstone course that I've taught at Texas A&M, I started using various forms of this, idea mache and then live mache for students to put together project reports in the course of extended projects. And then in that case, it involved interaction design, game design, system design, and the building of a multiplayer game. Because the longer a report is, the harder it is to think across the elements. And I mean, one thing I can say about that is other instructors in the course started using the software too when they saw like what was coming out of my class and how the students were using it. So that's a kind of validation. But I've always, while there have been many other professors, and that's part of the talk and part of the papers that have used these environments. I mean, this idea of nonlinear thinking is really deeply important to me personally. And so this kind of associational thinking, like how people have ideas when you put things next to each other, basically. So yeah, it's kind of been in many ways my research and teaching have been inseparable across these, and I always have thought about this work that supporting students, my own students as well as other people's, and having ideas in the process of learning about concepts is, that's my mission.
There's a hand from John Lee. You want to ask a question?
Yes. Oh, I couldn't find my video, but sorry. Thank you for your talk. Really appreciate everything. I recently actually read about your free-form curation paper about. I didn't know that today's speaker is about that paper's author. But by the way, I'm kind of interested about like everyday creativity, and when I read about that paper, one of the important notion of everyday creativity is like meaningfulness for the individual.
Sorry, is what for the individual?
Meaningfulness for individual.
Meaningfulness, yeah. Sure.
So I'm kind of really curious about like how can we conceptualize an operation about a concept meaningfulness, because like you talk about epistemology and methodology in the presentation, but my kind of challenge is that like how can we like capture each individual's meaningfulness through like interview or like lab setting, whatever. So that is kind of my question. And
are you asking about how to support people in, just a clarifying question about how to support people in generating meaning, or about how to understand how things are become meaningful to like study participants?
Yeah, so for instance, if you wanted to make people too meaningful through some technology, like how can you sure that is meaningful for each of the individual? Because a meaningfulness might be really subjective meaning for each of the people. So like the other notion of the creativity, like a novelty or originality, is a little bit more relatively easier to measure. What does it mean about novel? But like meaningfulness is pretty subjective notion. So I'm kind of curious about your opinion for that.
So, well, there's a few things come to mind. One is this Game of Thrones example, where the professor is doing this sketching over, this sketching over of this and talking about this quad environment here. And then the student, and you can hear, and it's really interesting to me, the student is kind of like tentative. It's like, and bringing it, I mean, she's brave enough to bring the example in, but then she's like, well, it's not a great image. And, but I think that, I think that there's a sense of meaning that you can see in this visual data that exactly that this in process of curation on the fly is generating meaning for the student. They're able to bring something from their experience of, well, at that point, it's like a combination television and the web. They're like, oh, this makes me think of that, and they can bring that spontaneously. And so in some ways, and then the teacher is able to, you know, does a really wonderful job the professor does a wonderful job on the fly of I think encouraging that, and then the visual annotation over it of the repetitive structure, which I'm trying to find here, but I'm having a little trouble picking it out. Maybe if I just turn it on. Yeah, there it is. So I think that sometimes you can see that in visual data. And actually another actually, now that I think of it, another example, maybe another favorite example of mine. And so, I mean, I'm being spontaneous in answering your question, but in the patterns data set, this, I think, especially meaningful is this scoliosis curation, because this is someone who has scoliosis who made this. And yeah, this kind of blew my mind when I saw this curation, honestly. I was very excited. I am very excited about this curation because it's so personally significant to this person. You know, it's like what they've been going through for years with their back, basically, and how it's affecting them. And this, like, telling layers of the story and the way the visual organization is supporting that, the sketching, the graph in the middle, and then this link at the bottom to the blog post that she wrote about her curve. So, I mean, so I guess there's two answers that I have to your question about meaningfulness. One is in visual data and its interpretation, you can see, and so it's we're interpreting the visual data to say this is someone's experience of meaningfulness. The other thing is that you can sometimes get people to talk about, and so that would be textual qualitative data. And this, again, is about the importance of different forms of qualitative data. You can get people to talk about their experiences. And one thing I forgot to highlight in terms of visual, textual qualitative data is that it's not about, I'm very skeptical in general about studies where people ask, do you like this environment? Do you like it better than some environment? Because those are prone to confirmation bias. But when you can get people to talk about what they did in an environment and what it meant to them, the people don't make that up. People can't make that up. So I think those are two kinds of ways to get at meaningfulness. And again, I mean, one of the things that you get from a spatial environment is this ability to put things next to each other. And then you get principles that were first articulated in my awareness by data artists like Marcel Duchamp and Max Ernst about the power of juxtaposition, the creative power. They put two things next to each other, and then people form interpretation. So, I mean, that's going to be, to me, general, in many cases, a kind of recipe for potentially for meaningfulness, when you can get people to bring in things or to see things that are meaningful to them, and then that part that's ineffable, but it's interesting and tricky. It's certainly worth investigation and in lots of ways. Does that answer your question? And again, you know, I mean, this is something that can support a long discussion over time about how to do these kinds of things. Is there another question or idea or a follow-up on that one?
I have a question. So based on your previous work with the body interaction, I was just thinking, how do you imagine the combination between data and body interaction, like for future projects?
Sorry, I didn't hear that question very well. Can it be louder somehow?
You want to either come up here and speak to the L or put it in chat?
Yeah. Hi, So I was asking, like, how do you imagine this, the combination in between data and embodied interaction for future projects? Because I think here at Atlas, we do work a lot with tangible objects, but I'm trying to imagine how that could be connected with the work that you've been like doing with data.
Thank you for that. That definitely sounds like the beginning of a long conversation. Well, there are lots of different potential aspects, characteristics of the answer to that kind of question. I mean, so first of all, it depends on what the intentions and goals of the embodied interaction, the tangible interaction are. And the design of, of studies, how are people going to be using that? What are we trying to learn? So, I mean, so partially one part of it has to do, let me go back to my, sorry about the pixelation in this slide. So the question is like how, to what extent is this a field or a laboratory study? How open-ended and how constrained is what the user is going to be doing? And that's going to influence the answers to this question. And are they going to, I mean, if they're using things that you're making, then are they doing it in the environment where you are? Are you giving people kits to use at home? That reminds me of a project, actually. I knew of some researchers that were doing something like that. We're planning to, and I mean, obviously the pandemic affects these kinds of things. So that, because that also affects like what kind of data can you gather and what are kind of, are you going to be, if they're coming into your environment, then maybe different kinds of video capture could be valuable because then you can go back and look at what they did and analyze it in different ways. Are you looking for things about how they're grasping things? I mean, do you have a context in mind that you're thinking about?
Yeah, so basically I was thinking, because here in the Living Matter Lab, we work with living organisms, and sometimes like it's hard to visualize, like we can experience like working with the living, the organisms, but then how to like maybe enhance or visualize that embodied interaction. I was thinking like if there are ways that combined with some visualization. I don't know, I was just, yeah.
So that's interesting. So is this interaction, I'm going to still have lots of questions. Is this interaction over a long period of time, or are there?
Yeah. Yes.
Well, so there are these things that you designed and creative that you're putting in people's environments. So then the one question is going to be is like, what's reasonable in terms of instrumenting that, which is very tricky. And I can't tell you what I think the answer is. I could engage in a discussion with you about it, but, it might not be okay to video those objects in people's environments for a long time. I don't know if it is, so what kinds of data are you collecting now about how the people are using living objects? That's really interesting. But so what kind of data you're collecting, or do you want to collect? What kind of data makes sense to collect? That's the first question, really.
Yeah, I would say like sometimes it's for example, is just the growing process, because they are organisms, we can make materials with them, or we collaborate to make materials with them. So there are some parts of the growing process that are not necessarily like visible at the human like eye. And yeah, and just like, of course, the body interaction is there and the experience comes from there. But then if we would like to share it with others, and then other people, maybe they are not able to just be in the whole process or the growing process or fabrication process or things like that. It's like how we can still share the experience.
And are the people, is the goal, do they actually end up touching these objects, or are they like environmentally responding to them, or?
Yeah, that can be the case.
Which they touch them, or they just are kind of being affected by having them in their environments, or both?
It can be both.
Both. Well, I definitely can see. So I mean, journal study would be one obvious thing to do. That is to ask people to write down stuff about their experiences with things, and you can interview them, like semi-structured interviews is another possibility. I mean, the question is, what kinds of data is it? You know, I think it could be really invasive to just have video cameras all the time in someone's environment. So maybe you could have video cameras where you promise to blur them in certain ways, blur the data, and then you can try to notice when and then you could do like a computer vision analysis of the data to try to notice when people are particularly present with in, you know, where they're present in the space with your objects. And then I guess the next thing this makes me think of is a technique that we've used a lot of photo elicitation. So if you can have some kind of data traces, even if they're blurred, then if you want to talk to the people about their experiences, if we want to talk to them, then we can show them those, you know, whatever representations that we have, and assuming that we can recognize when we think interesting things are happening, then we can, you know, we can use that to focus a process of semi-structured interviews to talk to them about what their experiences are at those specific times.
Mm-hmm.
Would that make sense?
Yeah.
Thank you for starting to talk to me about this. I'd be happy to continue.
Okay, I'm going to call time. Thank you, Andrew. That was fun. And we have your information so people can contact you as well.
Please. I would welcome that. Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Okay, I'm going to end that.